I am Mazharul, a PhD student at UW Madison, and today I will be presenting our work Aran, which is a framework to detect password guessing attacks in practice. As you probably have heard, in online password guessing, attacker takes a list of password guesses and sends those password guesses to an authentication server. And if their guesses is correct, then they would be able to compromise user's account. Naturally, the consequences of password guessing, users' password being compromised can be very devastating. Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report mentions that around 89% of web application hacking attempts come from password guessing attacks. And we all remember those catastrophic ransomware attacks that cause millions of dollars in damages. And majority of the time, this type of attacks happen due to users' password getting compromised. We know a lot about how to model users' password, but there has been no work on understanding users' password behavior from real logging data from an authentication server's perspective. Recently, at last year's USENIX, we instrumented a framework to understand legitimate users' password behavior from real login data, but that work did not look at how attackers chose their passwords. Therefore, we still do not have answers to very basic questions, such as how can we detect password guessing attacks, and even more worrisome, how attackers execute this type of password guessing attacks in practice. To protect users and not suffering from those catastrophic consequences, we need to find answers to these type of questions. To address this gap, we design a framework called Aran, and we take a different approach from prior work. In Aran, we use a filter, cluster, and analysis-based approach that I will talk about in detail in the next slide. We applied Aran on the real-world logging dataset that we have access to, collected via our prior work, and we discovered 29 attack clusters that we believe are coming from the same attackers and probably part of some attack campaigns. We also manually analyzed the attack clusters Aran outputted, and we were able to characterize attackers' password behavior and strategies adopted by attackers to remain stealthy and hard to detect. Throughout this process, we found around 1,157 new compromised accounts, and we disclosed these new compromised accounts responsibly to IT engineers of the respective organization. So to design Aran, we need to overcome a number of challenges. Firstly, an authentication server receives tons of logging requests from many users. So Aran has to be scalable. Secondly, we do not have reasonably good number of ground truth from real-world logging dataset. Therefore, it's not possible to train a supervised machine learning-based model to detect password guessing attacks. Lastly, we also lack a clear idea of the strategies adopted by attackers in practice. To solve the first challenge, we observed that by using some benign filters, we can essentially remove majority of the overwhelming logging requests received by the authentication server, and which are coming from IP addresses that are outrightly benign. To deal with the missing of ground truth, we consider an unsupervised clustering-based approach. This clustering-based approach is application-specific and custom-made to detect password guessing attacks. We also rely on a rich number of 12 features to identify strategies adopted by attackers, so we can characterize targeted behavior as well as untargeted behavior, and were able to underpin strategies adopted by attackers. The last step of Aran involves an IT engineers going through the clusters that are outputted by Aran, and since Aran has already grouped the IP addresses which are exhibiting similar malicious behavior in the same cluster, we believe it's become easier for an IT analyst to go through the clusters and underpin what type of strategies are attacker using. In summary, we call this approach FCF, filter cluster analysis. So in a bit more detail, Arania starts with a set of logging requests, and we group the logging request by their IP addresses and date. We call each resulted group as an L set. More clearly, L set subscript I will refer to those logging requests that are coming from an IP address I. Once we have the login L sets, then Arania applies some benign filter, which I talked about earlier. And we observe that very simple benign filters can effectively remove majority of the outright benign L set. This benign filters includes removing those L set which have very 100% successful logging requests. So if the L set is controlled by an attacker, the L set is likely to have very low success rate. And we also remove those L set where the IP belongs to an organ, or where the IP is private to an organization, because those are protected by the organization, those IPs. And we also remove those L sets if one of the logging requests have successfully completed two-factor authentication, because the remote password guessing attacker can't complete the two-factor authentication successfully. We also have more filters that we have used, and we discuss them in detail in our paper. After we have removed majority of the outright benign L set via clustering, we can via filtering. Now we can apply clustering on those L set which are potentially malicious. And our idea is very simple. If two L set are being controlled by the same attacker, they are likely to exhibit similar malicious behavior. And if we can do the clustering correctly, they would be grouped in the same cluster. Our clustering relies on a rich set of 12 features that includes both nominal features as well as numerical features. Nominal features such as client user agent, IP subnet, ISP, as well as numerical features such as password-based features, volumetric feature, timing features, success, so on and so forth. Applying clustering based on these 12 features is not straightforward. So therefore, we have to come up with the application-specific custom design distance function. And this distance function can handle both nominal feature as well as numerical feature. And this distance function can take two L set and will give a score between 0 and 1, indicating how likely two L set are being controlled by the same attacker. We also observed that agglomerative clustering is really good at grouping L set, grouping L sets exhibiting similar malicious behavior, rather than other clustering-based approach such as k-means, dbscan, and we also as well describe them in the paper in detail. Arania was designed to discover large-scale attack cluster. Therefore, as the last step, we fix a high threshold and sample only those clusters which have made number of logging requests than the fixed threshold, or have contacted more users than the fixed threshold. The reason for this high fixed threshold is that we wanted to have high precision. So that we observe that if you lower this threshold, then there is a chance that we might end up with some cluster that is not outrightly malicious, and thus it would hurt the precision of the Arania pipeline. Even with this high threshold, we got like 29 attack clusters, 25 of them are new, and we evaluated Arania on the Gossamer dataset that we had access to. Gossamer dataset is huge. It contained 34 million real logging requests collected over 7 months at 2 large-scale universities. Before applying the clustering, we had around 450,000 L set, and after applying the filtering, as usual, we were able to remove majority of them, and we applied clustering on those 8,000 potentially malicious L set. We got around 1,000 clusters, and from these 1,000 clusters, based on a fixed threshold of 5,000 at University 2 and 1,000 at University 1, we sampled 29 attack clusters. In summary, Arena were able to discover around 2,500 malicious IP addresses, sending over 350,000 malicious logins, attacking around 160,000 users from Gossamer dataset. And as I mentioned earlier, we were able to identify 1,157 unique users which were compromised. And these large-scale clusters give us an insight how attackers perform such attacks. So, for instance, we observed that attacker takes passwords which are very popular or passwords from a publicly or privately leaked dataset to maximize their chances of compromising users' password. Some attackers even filter their usernames based on the target website they are trying to attack. And interestingly, overwhelming majority of the attacker target the weakest link of the authentication server. So for us, it was the basic auth endpoint, because unlike other endpoint of the authentication server, it wasn't protected by an additional layer of security, such as two-factor authentication. So just by compromising user's password, attacker would be able to get into user's account. Attacker would be able to get into user's account. Lastly, some attackers also distribute their guesses across multiple IP addresses, we observed. And we also observed that some attackers some attacks in a very few minutes, sending an exceptionally high number of logging requests, whereas some attackers conduct their attacks on multiple consecutive days. So for example, one attack cluster had conducted attack for consecutively 2 weeks. And we believe this understanding of how attackers launch password guessing attacks, if they are incorporated with existing defenses to detect users' password compromise, can essentially improve those defenses. We have open source Arania and encourage anyone to use Arania on their logging dataset that they have access to discover new password guessing attacks and identify how attackers are doing such attacks. With that, I'm ready to answer your questions. Thanks.